Alex Antic, thanks so much for joining me on Bernardi. And firstly, congratulations, you're a new father. How's the first couple of weeks of parenthood going for you?
Thanks, Cory. It's going well. It's going well. The sleep is going less well. The feeding is a work in progress. I leave that to better equipped than I. So it's okay. It's going well.
Well, I'm pleased to hear that. Now, Alex, I'm talking about the ESG movement and how it's become a cult-like investment process. And it's been driven from the top down, meaning the big super funds who invest a heck of a lot of our savings are driving it and insisting it goes into responsible investing platforms. Now, it's almost impossible to find one here or abroad, given the fact that every business relies on transport chains, power from the internet, or power for the internet, and 80% or more of our electricity is generated by fossil fuels. So is this a bit of an environmental con, or is this a genuine agenda to save the planet?
Well, I think this is sort of an adjunct to this concept of corporate social responsibility we've been sort of watching for a long period of time. You know, we see it now across the board with corporates. We've got even sporting codes telling us what we should think and what we should do. And this is kind of a natural money-making, I guess, folly that the corporates have taken up. And, you know, who can blame the CEOs? They're about, you know, championing causes they think are going to make people feel good, and they're about sort of leading from the front and all that sort of stuff. But really, what they should be about is the bottom line, because ultimately, companies are there to make a profit. Corporate directors, office holders all have those responsibilities. And I think they do actually drift very perilously into the danger zone when they start pursuing ethical investing, as you've described it in the intro. And it's really one of those things, I think, that you know, isn't surprising. We've created this culture of virtue. It's almost a virtue cult in this country and in the West, where everyone's trying to out-virtue everyone else. And now we're seeing corporates digging into this environmental cred. It's really started back in the 80s. I think Chevron, actually one of the first companies to do this with a campaign called People Do, which, you know, Chevron being a massive oil company, and their ad campaigns were all green tundra and bears sort of coming out of the woods hibernating, and they set the gold standard for this. So ever since that time, we've seen corporates drifting into this world. And look, frankly, if I'm a shareholder, all I want to see is the bottom line.
Isn't it? Well, this is the point, right? Firstly, I think you've identified the start of misinformation, or fake news, as we now call it. But you've also belled the cat. As a shareholder, isn't it the company's responsibility to earn as much money as it possibly can, distribute that to the shareholders if that's their want, and then if the shareholder wants to donate to the Wombat Hollow Preserve, the tundra, whatever it is, they can do that. And if they don't want to, and they want to spend it on cigarettes and booze, they're allowed to do that too.
Well, that's the way it's meant to be. I mean, that's why historically it's been, of course, as we both know. And as I said, I think corporate directors and office holders do run the risk of breaching some of their fiduciary duties. I mean, really, they are there to make a return on investment, and that's what it should be. The question is, how do we get to this point? How do we get to the point where these organisations think that it's okay to freelance on this stuff? You know, we're now seeing insurers that won't underwrite fossil fuel projects, which is another limb of the whole argument. We're seeing banks that won't lend you know, to oil companies or whatever it may be. This sort of full court press on this. And I say, I mean, this is because of weak politicians. It's because of influence from the United Nations and places like the IPCC. And ultimately, it's this culture, almost this cult of virtue that's inveigled our society. We're seeing the difficulties now that come with this. And people may well say, well, what's the problem? You know, well, the problem is this, quite frankly, that, as you say, corporates are there to do their job, which is to build a society, to make money for their shareholders and be part of the framework, not to tell us what, you know, the latest endangered falcon needs to be done and where we need to spend our money.
Well, there's a really important point you raised there, which was about banks, say, not lending to resource companies or to oil companies and insurers. These organisations have protections, they have endorsement from government, they have a status that is not available to just any Joe Blow that wants to set up a business. So should the government be doing more to say you've actually got to help and sustain the projects, the industries that provide jobs and prosperity for so many Australians?
Yeah, well, it's a great balancing act, isn't it? I mean, you know, those of us that are, you know, low government interference types, free market types would sort of recoil from that. We see a bit of this in the debate about big tech and, we always hear this debate about big tech censoring and cancelling and doing all this sort of stuff, and the market should just sort it out. And why doesn't the market just sort it out? Well, sometimes these organisations are so big and so bad that we do require government intervention. It may be that it gets to that point here. I mean, I don't want to see projects, gas-fired, gas exploration projects, whatever they may be, getting shut down simply because they can't find an underwriter anywhere in the world. I think it's a very valid point. I think governments do need to look at that, because ultimately we've got a lot of money to repay. We've got $1 trillion in debt that will be needing to be repaid by 2024, and we've got to start getting focused on what makes money.
Yeah, Senator Alex Antic, I love your common sense as always. Thank you for joining me on Bernardi tonight, and congratulations once again. I hope mum and baby are doing well. Thanks for joining me.
Thanks, Cory.